Turns out that Apple, not big fans of Lina Khan, and according to Jon Stewart, basically prevented him from interviewing her on his podcast when he had a podcast with Apple. Now, Jon Stewart did luckily interview Federal Trade Commission Chair Lina Khan on The Daily Show recently and said the following: I wanted to have you on a podcast and Apple asked me or asked us not to do it. They literally said, please don't talk to her, having nothing to do with what you do for a living. I didn't think they cared for you is what happened, okay? Now, Lina Khan is definitely hated by the elite. She has been pretty effective in her role as the head of the Federal Trade Commission. She has been fighting monopolization and these big mergers. And as a result of her being so active, it's actually prevented potential mergers from even coming up, right? So it's kind of had a chilling effect on monopolies. Now, with that said, Stewart said the last part sarcastically, so I should be clear about that. He also said that Apple wouldn't let him talk about what he describes as AI's false promise. Like, what is that sensitivity? Why are they so afraid to even have these conversations out in the public sphere? Khan didn't really comment on Stewart's claim that Apple didn't want her on their platform, but she did respond by saying this: I think it just shows the dangers of what happens when you concentrate so much power and so much decision making in a small number of companies. In the same way that you need the Constitution to create checks and balances in our political sphere, you also need the antitrust and anti-monopoly laws to safeguard against concentration of economic power, because you don't want an autocrat of trade in the same way that you don't want a monarch. And by the way, I mean, we should talk a little bit about how media really works in this country, because while you might be under the impression that you have so many different options to get informed, much of our media actually falls under a select few major corporations. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but Cenk, I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in on this.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth, as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you. Yeah, so I've now worked in media pretty much my whole life. And I was an anchor on MSNBC and on Current TV. I was a contributor on many of these cable news channels, etc. I've been on radio, online, you name it. And there's one consistent thing outside of here at TYT, which is that money rules everything around you, okay? So advertisers are sacrosanct. And I remember at MSNBC, they didn't want me to criticize an advertiser in one of my scripts. And that's because that's where they get their money. And by the way, one of their top advertisers are American politicians. They use the money in politics to buy ads on news stations. Now, in this case, there's one factor that's even larger when it comes to money, and that's the parent company's financial interest. So for example, MSNBC, before they turned left, was deeply conservative cable news channel, just like Fox News. They were trying to copy Fox News. This is pre-Keith Olbermann, pre-Rachel Maddow, okay? And they fired everyone who was against the Iraq war when the war was starting. Phil Donahue, Ashley Banfield, Jesse Ventura, etc. I wrote about it in my book, Justice is Coming. Why did they do that? Because at the time, the parent company that owned MSNBC was GE, a defense contractor. And they made an ungodly sum of money from the Iraq war. So they were very much pro-war. They were basically using MSNBC as a marketing outlet, not to do news, but to do marketing for things like war that would actually get them a lot more money. So Apple it was one of the most profitable companies in the history of the world and currently today. So they're always in the top 2 to 3. That's how big they are, right? So Apple does not want to endanger its financial interests. And antitrust lawsuits and actually being able to break apart Apple is the #1 danger to Apple. So some tiny little show that they have on a streaming platform they have, even with a guy who's famous, etc. Oh my God, that is nothing compared to the other giant financial interests. So if he's gonna start, upsetting that apple cart, That's an easy kill for them.
They don't like that.
No, they don't, okay? And of course, I mean in the sense of terminating his contract, ending his show, etc. So is that why they got rid of him? Yeah, definitely. I could tell you right now that I would be shocked if that wasn't the only reason.
So Apple is in fact facing an antitrust lawsuit, but it's not by the FTC. That antitrust lawsuit having to do with the monopolization of the smartphone market was brought forth by the Justice Department. The FTC is actually not directly involved in that suit. It was, however, like the FTC was involved in challenging other corporations and big tech firms, most recently pointing at Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. Like Lina Khan has been very vocal in wanting to break up these big companies, right? Now, with that in mind, while working on a House subcommittee, Lina Khan wrote a 449-page report calling for the breakup of large tech companies, including Apple, comparing them to Gilded Age monopolies, which is likely the reason why Apple did not want Jon Stewart interviewing her on his podcast, which was carried by Apple. But I want to go to the next graphic because this is something that was really emphasized when I was in journalism school, and it shows you why it is that our media is so broken, because it's really owned by a few major corporations. So if you look at this graphic, you'll see that in 1983, 90% of media outlets were controlled by about 50 companies. Through consolidation, that number is now way down. Comcast, Disney, AT&T, Paramount, Sony, and Fox own most of the news media that Americans consume. And that is a problem. It gives you the illusion of options in the media market. But in reality, when it comes to mainstream media, you don't really have much options because most mainstream media falls under the umbrella of 6 major corporations.
Yes, and now, by the way, Discovery's taken over for AT&T in ownership of CNN, HBO, etc. But the same idea holds. So, guys, that's why what we do infuriates a lot of the rest of the press, because we refuse to do what these guys do, which is suck up to advertisers that are, there's good advertisers, there's plenty of progressive companies and people trying to do the right thing in the world. Wonderful, right? Happy to have them. But there's a lot of bad guy advertisers, defense contractors, oil companies, you name it, right? And we say no to those. And we don't just maniacally either support the Democrats or the Republicans and tell you a bunch of BS around it. So, but how many places are there like us? Not that many. Why? Because our financial interests are tied to you guys. Like, for example, paid members sustain us, right? We're trying to get to 100,000 members this year. tyt.com/team, help out, right? That way, we're indebted to you guys.
Exactly, yeah.
And if we're one of these big 6, like we merge into one of them, or we cater to all those giant advertisers that want to influence people in Washington, as a lot of these other companies do, well then, we're goners, because at that point, we're no different than the rest of them. They're all a giant monolith. That's why we show you guys on the show all the time. You'll see on culture war issues, they try to rip us apart. But whenever there's an economic issue, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN anchors all unite. When it comes to Medicare for all, that would get you health care. They go, oh, how are we gonna afford that? Well, how are you gonna pay for that? Every single one of those supposedly antagonistic anchors all of a sudden agree. Student debt relief, how are we gonna pay for that? MSNBC anchors saying the same exact things that Fox News anchors are saying, right? Because they all have the same economic interest, which is not aligned with the American people or the viewers.
Exactly.
We're trying to align our interests with you guys. And so it's a big experiment. Let's see if we could be number 7 here. And by the way, if you think that's fanciful, you're wrong. We're top 10 in terms of viewership in almost all the platforms we're on. So we're not that distant from these guys, but we need the resources because we don't have their endless bucket of cash that they get from advertisers and parent companies. tyt.com/team if you can help. But bottom line here is Jon Stewart's an American hero who stood up to the powerful. And so I don't know how long Comedy Central is gonna keep him. We'll see what happens with Viacom, their parent company, etc. But hats off to Jon Stewart and Lina Khan, some brave folks who are trying to do right by you guys as they fight against the giant powers of corporate America. And that's, by the way, sorry, that's a misnomer. There is no America there. All of these corporations are owned by multinational interests.
Right.
And so Apple is a multinational company that has no allegiance to America at all. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.